Welcome to the Life with Grief podcast. I'm your host, grief and transformational life coach and fellow griever, Tara Accardo. Hi guys, welcome back to the Life with Grief podcast. I'm your host, Tara Accardo, and with today's mini-sode, this whole topic of the one thing that no one says about grieving came from a time recently where I caught myself thinking, why is no one talking about this? And what I'm gonna get into today, yes, you might hear about it from fellow grievers. Once someone actually goes through a loss, they might be like, oh my gosh, why is no one saying this? Why is no one talking about this? Why is there no warning about this? And what I'm about to say, it seems like such an obvious thing in a way, but it's also really not, because there is still so much shame and illiteracy around grief that needs to be worked on as a society. So this little mini-sode is sort of my rally cry of sorts, me shouting from the rooftop that we need to talk about this more and normalize this. So without further ado, as a certified grief coach, you might be wondering, what is the one thing that I feel like no one says about grieving, or certainly doesn't say enough, or certainly doesn't say loud enough? That is how long grief lasts. So let's talk about this. But of course, I will also share just a few of my very top tips and things I would recommend in terms of how to cope with and navigate this fact that the grieving experience doesn't really end, and it does go on for so much longer than we thought. And by the way, with this episode, even though this is sort of like the one thing I feel like we don't say about grieving, you guys, there's so many more things. This really isn't my end all be all, okay? There's a lot of things that I feel like are not talked about enough in terms of grief and grieving and what this really looks like, and so much more to come on this podcast. I've already talked a lot about this and just things that I feel like need to be talked about and normalized more. But when I was really sitting and thinking about this is what really this is just what kept coming up. And I just feel like it's one of the biggest misconceptions. So that's what I'm going with today. And I want to start off just by saying, it's just baffling to me that people think grief has a timeline or even an end date. But think about it. It's no surprise that this is something we don't hear enough or it's not talked about for a lot of reasons. We are told that there are 5 stages of grief, which is just a very misunderstood and misinterpreted concept. We are told that we have to move through these things in a reasonable amount of time, or, if we don't, that's a red flag and that we're not okay and that we need help and all the things. We are expected to be functioning at work after a ridiculously short amount of time. We're expected to keep it together and be a functioning human being and member of society way sooner than we should. And it just seems like there is no acknowledgement that grief lasts a long time. And the ultimate reason for this is because it takes on new iterations throughout our life. And this whole, grief has no timeline. It's a phrase that sounds very comforting at first, and it is, I guess, in a way. But the reality behind that can be very, very isolating. We are often told that grief softens with time and that eventually we'll move on. Yes, perhaps our grief does soften, but I think there's a really important distinction between moving on and moving forward. So for many, grief lingers. It shows up in really subtle ways, even years down the road. And if that happens, there are some people out there that feel that is like a bad thing, or again, that's a red flag, or that's not normal. But the truth is, grief can become a part of our identity. It is a constant. And though it is a quieter companion, it ultimately reshapes itself in our entire lives because it simply doesn't disappear. So for those of us in the depths of loss, there can be this intense pressure to get back to normal, right? Friends and family might check in a little bit less frequently. Maybe they assume that we're doing better, or they just expect us to be, kind of ready to focus on new things with some time. And the thing with grief is it's so subjective. It completely depends. It's just one of those things that's, kind of in the eye of the beholder as far as how long we feel it's acceptable to sort of like hold on to a loss. But here's the truth. Grief can last for much longer than society typically allows for. And I want to shout from the rooftops today that that is okay. So in this quick episode, number one, I wanted to validate all of that and just, explain my rationale behind calling this out. But we're also just going to really quickly explore why grief lasts for so long, how it can change over time, and ways to, for lack of a better term, accept that this is a lifelong journey. So first and foremost here, grief is layered. There's an immediate pain of the loss, of course. There's that anguish. There is just this rawness that we just can't shake. But then it kind of evolves into this slow realization of the life without the person or the thing that you've lost. You might find yourself grieving new things over time. So maybe, missing certain milestones, anniversaries, everyday moments where the loss resurfaces unexpectedly. I can just briefly only speak for myself here. I never want to speak for any fellow griever, but, of course, in the first 6 months to a year without my parents, it was horrendous. It still is. But my grief has taken on a new form. As I've continued to get older, I gain wisdom. I have a couple more years under my belt. I open myself up to new things and new opportunities and new perspectives. And in so many ways, that's been amazing and life-changing. But I've talked about this here on the podcast before. We welcomed our daughter this year. I did not have my parents there through any of that. I still don't. They'll never get to watch her grow up. I am constantly grieving that every single day. I at some point say to myself, my God, I just wish they were here for this. I cannot believe they're not here for this. I wish for 30 seconds, I got myself thinking this the other day. I was like, literally, I would give 30 seconds just to see my mom and dad hold my daughter. That's it. And that's a new grief. I didn't have a daughter 2-3 years ago. So of course that grief is going to bubble up to the surface again. So it's just an example. Of course, this can look however this looks for you. But I just want to call out that sometimes, year 2, year 3, that can almost be more difficult at times for some grievers. So maybe that first 6 months to a year was harder for you and you're actually doing better in year 2, 3, 4. That's fine. Again, this is the point of this entire podcast and this episode is it's whatever it looks like for you. But I just want to normalize that many, many people actually say with a little bit of time, it almost gets worse in a way. Like, yes, the shock has worn off, but the reality, the weight of their absence, if we're talking about the loss of a loved one, the weight of that absence is becoming more prominent, more permanent. And that is a whole nother thing that we have to navigate. So the duration of grief isn't about getting over something. It's about integrating it. Because unlike physical pain that, in theory heals, grief is more, think of it more like a scar that it fades, but it never fully disappears. It's always a little bit of a reminder there. And there is a reason that many, many people feel their grief long after the immediate loss, because it becomes a part of who we are. So it's just so important. This is just such a testament to why it's really important not to think of grief as a straight line or something to be done in stages. And I had a lot of people impose that on me, especially in my sort of earlier days of grieving, or they threw the 5 stages at me. But I think what's really important here is to normalize that it is cyclical. We might feel okay for a while. We might even feel, dare I say, good. but then a memory or an anniversary or just some simple, beautiful moment that we miss them can bring back the ache that we felt in the beginning in full force. So it's like waves. You might have heard the phrase like grief is like waves, or it's like the ocean, right? Some days are calm while others can just crash upon us unexpectedly. And it's really important to hold space for that. Many people who are years into their grieving experience report feeling this ebb and flow. And I want to validate today, it is not a sign of regression at all. Instead, it is just simply a reminder that grief evolves. It is flowing and following its own path. It is a path that we often don't really have control over. And I understand how scary and unsettling that can feel, because we just want, it's like you think about these waves, right? We just want them to level out. We just want them to chill for even a minute. And that's already difficult and hard enough to process sometimes without the pressures of society or family or friends on top of that, right? And this societal push to move on can be incredibly damaging. So we need to normalize that grief can be a lifelong experience. It is a part of us that it doesn't mean that we're broken or we're unable to heal. Again, this is what I want to just shout from the rooftops, because I feel like this is such a big misconception. But in fact, it's one of the most compassionate things we can do for ourselves. It's to stop expecting our grief to magically disappear. It's to stop having this expectation that after 6 months or that first year, that it's going to miraculously get better. Absolutely not. And if you are in the midst of a longer grieving experience right now, please take comfort in knowing that your experience is so valid and that you are not stuck. You're not holding on for too long. I know that is so often thrown at us. I have had people say it before because I talk about grief so much. I have had people that my parents knew, like message me and they're like, I feel like you really need to move on. I feel like you're really stuck. They've said all of those things that you're not supposed to say to someone, right? They're like, why can't you just move on? Be happy with what you have. Okay, so what? You've been through what you have. I've been through loss too. Way to invalidate everything I'm feeling in one foul swoop, right? It was shocking. So the duration of our grieving experience is just so personal. It is absolutely okay if it lasts a lifetime. If you walk away with no other message from today, please know it's that. That's really the purpose of this mini-sode, is just to call attention to this. And no matter where you are in your grieving experience, your grieving journey, whatever you want to call it, doesn't matter. Just take that with you today, okay? If you are ready to change your life and level up the way you're navigating your grieving experience in a big way, listen up, because this is for you. My Life with Grief membership is designed to help you heal, cope, elevate your soul, and navigate life after suffering a loss. I wanted this membership to help you cope with your grief, of course, but we go beyond that here. Because with life, there is grief, and there are so many complexities and layers to this process. And it's a lifelong thing, which I think is such an important thing to recognize. That's where this community, me as your coach, and this membership come in to guide you, support you, and lift you up. This is an all-in-one membership program for personal growth, well-being, community, and healing from loss from the inside out. We're digging into how to overcome the overwhelm and confusion of grief and tap into an intentional, meaningful life. And remember, it's not about getting over it and moving on. It's about growing around your grief and giving yourself grace as you move forward. It's acknowledging that your loss will always be with you, but you're doing so in a way that's easy to digest and is all about the baby steps, and in a way that isn't too daunting or too much too fast, alongside the perfect tools to help you. We're taking it a step at a time here, but in a way that is super impactful and will make a difference in your life. I hope you're ready for some perspective-changing content to come your way, because we are just getting started in this membership. I really hope to see you in the community with us. Tap the link in the show notes for more details. So really quick, just to wrap this up, what do we do with this grief that lasts? Because I know how overwhelming and how exhausting this can be. There are honestly so many things that we can do here. I actually find it very hard to narrow it down. I go into more detail in different episodes of this podcast as far as like coping tools and things that I really recommend. So I'm just going to give 4 very high level of my like most recommended tips and things to consider here as far as really navigating and processing grief as a lifelong thing. Number 1, create rituals. So establishing just very small, very meaningful rituals that honor your loved one and your loss can be so healing. And again, the expectation is never to be healed. Like I mentioned the scar, and while the scar might like technically be healed, it's still there. It's still present. It's still a reminder. So it's about, as I mentioned earlier, integrating these losses into our life and trying to understand, okay, this has happened to me. I didn't ask for this. I sure didn't sign up for this. These are the circumstances that were unfortunately handed to me. So what do I do with this? Where do I go from here? Rituals are a beautiful way to just honor that and bring just a little bit of joy or just a little bit of peace and clarity into our lives. So this can be anything under the sun, you guys. This could be, lighting a candle on a significant date. This could be visiting a special place that you love to go with them. It's maybe having your morning coffee or tea in their cup and just thinking of them whenever you drink out of it. It's keeping a journal that is dedicated to your memories with them. Maybe it's like a dream journal. I actually have that with my parents as well. I just write it in my notes app on my phone, but anytime I have a dream that involves them, whether it's a pleasant one or kind of a more traumatizing one, I write it down. There's so many big and little things that we can do to carry them with us. So create these little rituals, make space for it in your life, because when we tamp it down or we are forcing ourselves to move on or move past it because we feel like we have to, or because we feel like we're doing something wrong, if we're holding on to it too much, that is just a recipe for dysregulation and just simply not acknowledging like the impact that these people or thing or whatever it is that you lost like had on our lives. That's a big deal. That's something to be recognized. Number 2 is building a healthy support system. So surrounding yourself with people who understand that grief is an ongoing journey, whether it is a grief support group, whether it is a therapist, maybe you just have some friends who get it. Having people that can understand and validate your feelings and truly get that these losses can stay with us and they take on new forms. Having those solid people around you makes all the difference. Remember, I am here for you. My membership is here for you. It's a place where fellow grievers, we can all come together. We can acknowledge these things. That's half the reason I created it. So please know there's actually so many resources out there for you. They can be very affordable. It's just having those really valuable, uplifting people in your life. Number 3, allow yourself to feel joy. Now, this is not to be confused with, find some joy and happiness and gratitude and move on. No. Here's what I want to clarify. Sometimes we can feel guilty for enjoying our life again. This, I think, is where it being imposed on us that we need to move on or that grief is only supposed to last like a certain amount of time. This is where this is so damaging, because if we are hearing those things, then whether consciously or subconsciously, we are taking that in. And if we feel like we are holding on to it for too long, that there's something wrong with us, or that we should be enjoying our life more. It's such a contradiction of things that we're hearing versus what we're actually feeling. So my biggest piece of advice, stay in your own lane, check in with yourself and figure out how you're feeling about it. And I just want to say, like, just don't guilt yourself for laughing and for smiling and enjoying life. Experiencing happiness doesn't mean you are over your grief. It doesn't mean that you're disrespecting any loved one that you have lost. Letting yourself enjoy your life is truly a beautiful way of honoring your loved one's memory. I can guarantee, I never like to put words in anyone else's loved one's mouth, but I would bet you that they don't want you to be miserable, that they would not want you to live in any darkness or with any guilt or regret. And so it's a beautiful balance that we have to strike of honoring our loved ones and the impact that they had on our lives, but also honoring the fact that you are here and you are alive and that you have life still left to live. Last but not least here, my fourth sort of tip / recommendation that I kind of just alluded to a little bit is to check in with yourself regularly. Take time to notice how your grief is manifesting in your life. So ask yourself, are there any specific triggers that you might need to work through a little bit, or at least just acknowledge and be aware of? Are there any patterns that have sort of developed, whether there may be good or maybe some not so great patterns that also need to be worked on a little bit? Have there been moments of joy that have surprised you? How can you lean into that a little bit? How can you incorporate a little bit more of that into your life? Also, having people that add value to your life around you, but also recognizing if there's maybe people around you that actually make your grief a little bit worse. And think about those relationships and how that might need to evolve, because unfortunately, grief and loss, that brings out some true colors in people. And I've certainly been through this. I know many grievers that have, whether it's you just need to reevaluate your relationship a little bit, or maybe it's time to, for lack of a better term, cut someone out, right? It's all about just kind of reprioritizing and understanding how what you have been through can and will continue to change your perspective. So anyway, these check-ins, they are just so great because they allow you to understand how your grief has woven itself into your life and how it will continue to weave itself into your life, but ultimately how it can and will evolve with you. And that's just a great thing to just always be aware of, and just being very open to the fact that, like, this could change, and that's okay. And that's a beautiful thing, because that means we are growing and evolving and changing too, which is actually a good thing. So just some quick closing thoughts. Again, grief that is lasting doesn't mean you aren't capable of healing. Healing being something that never really stops. So just keep that in mind. It simply means that you have integrated your grief into your life in a way that honors both the loved one that you've lost and yourself. It's sort of resigning ourselves to this grieving journey that, like I said, we did not ask to be on, and that can feel very daunting. But in this acceptance of sorts, again, I don't really like the word acceptance, but just hang with me on that one. There is also just this incredible resilience and a knowledge that even if our grief stays with us in new and different forms, we can still find peace and clarity and joy and new doors that will open for us. And you never know what form that is going to take on. So it's just getting curious about your grief. I've also said that before, but I think that's such a cool way to look at it when you're ready. If you are earlier on in your grieving experience right now, that might not be for you, but just keep your mind open. So if you're listening here today and wondering if it is normal to feel that pang of loss even years later, please know this: your grief is valid. And yes, it is okay if it's still a part of you. It's okay to feel that pang however many years down the line it is. As I mentioned, the shock typically wears off, but you may or may not have heard, it's like this analogy where, imagine there's a rock in your pocket, right? It's like this brand new rock, and you feel it because it's kind of, you can't not notice it. It's there, it's heavy, it's uncomfortable. But imagine you continue carrying that rock, you get stronger, time passes, you get used to it. It doesn't necessarily mean that it'll always be comfortable being there, but you grow with it. You figure out ways to still move with it. And all of this, the grief, the love, all of it is a testament to the love that you shared with whoever it is that you've lost, and the impact that all of this and their presence has had on your life. And that is a massive thing. So it is no wonder that grief is something that can last a lifetime. And I know there might be people in your life that don't acknowledge that or can't seem to acknowledge that, but don't let anyone tell you otherwise or impose any opinions on you about that. Let it be a reminder of how deeply you can feel, how resilient you truly are. Not that resilience is the end goal. It's just a beautiful example of how you are so capable of allowing these losses and everything that has happened to you and will continue to happen to be a source of strength and perhaps even inspiration for you. Not always this constant dark cloud. And with some time and the right tools to help you, this journey can be a lighter one. The light can come in. It mixes in with the darkness. It's complicated. It's complex. I know that, but please remember you are also not alone. There are so many support systems and resources and all of the things to help you. I myself am proud to be one of them. So I hope this episode was inspiring, helpful, validating today. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode today, and just a friendly reminder to be kind to yourself and to take each day as it comes, because that is really all we can do at the end of the day. All right, guys, I'm sending you a big hug today. Thank you again for listening, and I will see you in the next episode. I am sending you a huge thank you for tuning into today's episode, my friend. I'm so grateful you're here and for the steps you're taking to heal your heart, open your mind, fulfill your soul, learn, grow, and evolve, and move through this crazy thing called life in big, beautiful, impactful ways. Visit lossesbecomegains.com for my blog, membership, more coping tools, ways to work with me, and so much more. And be sure you're following along on Instagram and Facebook at Losses Become Gains, and on Instagram and TikTok at Life with Grief Podcast. I love seeing new faces, meeting new people, hearing your stories, and supporting you however I can. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and share this episode or this podcast with someone who could use it too. And remember to always keep asking yourself, how will I turn my losses into gains today? I'll catch you in the next episode.